Can the Republican Party become a governing party again? Let's find out on this episode of En Route. Well, Ariel, it is great to have you back.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be back. It's always nice to talk about my favorite topics of, where the GOP currently is and, where the good people are and how people are trying to restore some sanity. So really excited to be back.
So everyone basically coming into 2022, the kind of common wisdom is that the Democrats are going to probably lose the House. Well, probably actually pretty much everyone says they will lose the House and might lose the Senate. And so everyone then is looking at what's happening with the GOP, which is interesting. As they like to say, that's a Minnesota way of saying it's nuts. And so, the question is, coming into 2022, people are wondering, is there any hope to right the ship, or are we just going to be going in, stumbling into this, or should we just, put all our chips into the Democratic Party? I know that you're someone that wants to stay in the fight, so I guess the first question is, why should we still do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first time I was on your podcast, I ended with where I find hope, which is in having conversations with significantly younger Republicans, Republicans who come from very different backgrounds than my own, that seem to have organically kind of developed more of a kind of type of Republicanism that mirrors what I think it should be, which is kind of old school, business conservative, been called New England Republican, which also means in some circles, I'm a rhino. Take your pick of how you want to describe us. I do want to stand and fight. I think sometimes this is a really hard topic of conversation for people because I think innately my stand and fight is kind of grounded in not necessarily my wishes for where our political system is, but the reality of our political system. And so I think sometimes for people, it's hard to find hope in a place where you're talking about, I want to prevent the further degradation of my party, not so much I would love to be in a place where I could have a party that really reflects my brand of Republicanism still, but we're not quite there yet. And so I think for some people, it's really hard to see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel when you're thinking, how do I stand and fight for a party that really isn't representing me and seems to be trending in the wrong direction? And then I look across the aisle and see the other party trending in a direction that also, is getting further and further away from something that I would, I would like to see in my political party. But I think the reality is this, right? We live in a two-party system right now. And so you gotta pick your lane. And the biggest way that you can have an impact, and my organization, Republican Women for Progress, has been saying this for years, the biggest way you can have an impact is by making sure that you exercise your right to vote frequently, whenever you get the chance, specifically in primaries. So what that means is that if you don't live in an open primary state, you have to pick your party in terms of which one you want to influence more, right? And I just happen to be in the Republican Party. I've been in it for years. I quite frankly look at what's been going on in the administration the last year, and I admit I'm really disappointed. I really thought that Joe Biden was going to be a more moderating force and kind of not just a return to order in terms of getting things done, but in terms of really trying to bridge the gap. And I haven't seen that happen. And so for that reason, I also look across the aisle and I think to myself, I don't see myself in the Democratic Party. I haven't for years, but I certainly don't at this point. I'm not progressive. And so to me, it's where can I have the best impact? And the best impact, in my opinion, is still staying in the Republican Party and trying to make sure that, we elect people who are actually, more of the mindset of my brand of Republicanism and not this kind of populist Trumpist streak that we've seen kind of really get some legs under it for the last 5 years.
One of the things I think it seems like is happening right now within the party, I believe it was late last year was when the infrastructure package went through the House. It went through the Senate first. You got 19 Republicans. That was actually amazing in this day and age to get that many. And then it went to the House and you got 13 Republicans that voted in favor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the death threats started happening. I mean, they got basically hit with people angry at them. They thought they were traitors. People even within their own caucus were saying that they were terrible and they should, they should be primaried. And so it seems like it's harder and harder and I think this is in both parties, but it's harder and harder for any lawmaker to chart their own independent path to vote with their district. And now you have to vote with your party. It doesn't really, no one cares about whether it's the district that you live in, you have to vote this strange way. So if you're trying to get people who are interested in actually governing, how do you do that when you have this environment where people are not really interested in helping to, get the process of governing going?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And look, I was horrified at how people were treated after taking that vote on a non-controversial bipartisan investment in our infrastructure and hard infrastructure in this country, right? Like that, it blew my mind. These are dollars that we've known we've needed in our systems for years. This should not have been a partisan issue. And I admit, I work with some younger folks and who are, sometimes more conservative than I am. And I was pretty horrified that one of them, following that infrastructure vote, said to me, Catco should be raked over the coals, right? Like he broke the line and he gave Democrats a win. And I was like, he's governing. I don't understand how you can be angry at him for doing his job. He's governing. And this isn't about winning political points. So I think first and foremost, we have to, as the electorate, we have to step away from this idea that we are electing people into federal office or state or local for that matter, and with the idea that they're there to win points against the other side. They're not. They're there to govern. And sometimes that means that there are going to be compromises that you maybe don't like or that you don't understand. But when you're voting for somebody, you're voting because you either like the way that they think through things or you trust their judgment. And trusting someone's judgment doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them all the time. But so I think as the electorate, we need to start taking more kind of ownership and accountability for our votes also, and how we're choosing our elected officials and who we're sending to Congress. What I do actually think is really interesting, though, is because we live in this world where social media is very present, people feel very free to, lob death threats at elected officials. It seems like that's kind of everyone, but I don't actually think it is. And I think once people look at something like the bipartisan infrastructure bill and see that money starting to come back into their districts and into their home, their states, and helping to shore up our infrastructure, that feels very different than kind of tuning into your news channel and hearing that, your Republican representative voted with Democrats, right? Like those Republicans were voting with their conscience and they were voting to bring money into their states and districts to help people and improve people's lives. And I think focusing on that and trying to actually go back to the old standard of all politics being local, whereas right now I think we're very much in this like all politics is national, and that doesn't help people's lives. The local components, the state components, and then how the federal level comes in and partners on those levels is how people's lives are improved. But I think that that's a very different echo chamber than we get through our media consumption.
One other thing is, I I hate to use the word sane because that's not really, I never
Yeah.
liked the whole thing, but how do we actually kind of draw up a faction or a coalition of people who want a different kind of politics, who want people who actually govern, who are willing to make compromises, who are principled, yes, but they're willing to also make compromises, because it seems like that's not going to just appear. And sometimes that's what I hear from probably people that you and I would agree would be on the same side, that will just think that people will just do the right thing. And I don't think it happens that way. So how do we get that kind of coalition to come together?
Yeah. So I think there are two different elements that I want to tease out a little bit here. I think the first is looking at the makeup of our current Congress and where our leaders are, and going into the midterms and what that means for certain Republicans. So for me, what kind of infusing, I think, some more principle, I want to call it like passionate principled, but people who want to govern and do the hard work of governing. I think from my perspective, going into the midterms, what's really important is protecting the folks that we currently have in office that have demonstrated a willingness to govern, even when it is, politically uncomfortable, or they're worried about being called out. Again, the 13 Republicans who voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, those are people that I think, and not all of them are running again because of redistricting and other components, but looking really at Republicans, and I think we'll be able to do this in 2024, thinking about Democrats being in the minority, like who are the Democrats that are kind of coming to the middle, or who are trying to broker kind of agreements or bipartisan solutions for things. Those would be the people that I would be pointing to. Adding to those 13 Republicans, and there's some overlap here, but then also the Republicans who've taken hard votes related to January 6th and the insurrection, Republicans who have taken hard votes on impeachment because of January 6th. Obviously I think Liz Cheney is kind of like the gold standard here. And I think looking at those folks and supporting them financially, door knocking, if you live in their district or their state, or phone banking for them, right? I think so much revolves around fear right now in our political systems, you basically have to demonstrate that there's support for these people who are being more level-headed, while they're serving in office. And so I think that's kind of step one, is just reinforcing that there's space and that those folks are politically viable. So for Republican Women for Progress, we've long said being like a year, things change yearly, right? Depending on who wins the elections. But we've said for the last year, we can't talk about whether or not Donald Trump has taken over the party, because we aren't going to know until after we get through the primary season for the 2022 midterms, right? Donald Trump is backing a whole bunch of primary challengers to anybody who thinks or that he feels was politically disloyal to him. Now, a measure of his actual power within the party is going to be whether or not those primary challengers beat the incumbents. So I think if you care about turning away from kind of Trumpism or that brand of Republicanism, I don't really consider it Republicanism, but if you want to turn away from that, the best thing you can do is be supporting the people that he's targeting right now, because there has to be an alternative vision for the Republican Party. I also think that getting out and voting, I think also, if you feel like you want to run, you absolutely should, right? I think I just had a meeting the other day with a wonderful candidate, Jennifer Strahan, who is running a primary against Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's an excellent candidate. She is a little bit more conservative than I am, more socially conservative than I am, but she came into the race because she was like, I don't think that this is how my community is better represented or best represented. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is not delivering on anything for her constituencies. And so I want to do right by my community. And so she doesn't come from a political background, but she's decided to get into this race. She's a really compelling candidate. I'm super excited about her. But I think that also is this other piece, is that if you care about politics, if you care about policy in the direction of this country, and you think that you have ideas or that you are interested in running, run for something. I think, we got to get people who don't see themselves as politicians running.
Mhm. Do you, with this person that's challenging Marjorie Taylor Greene, do you know what the prospects of for her are in her district? Is there a solid chance that she could actually
Yeah,
beat?
well, I believe so.
Okay.
I think they just 2 weeks ago, or it might have even been last week. Goodness, I feel like I'm losing track of time these days, Dennis. They just had some interesting polling come out that basically ties Jennifer Strahan with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Interestingly enough, the redistricting also really is going to be helpful here in Georgia, because Marjorie Taylor Greene won by 12,000 votes in her primary. And in the redistricting, she lost basically two of her strongholds that would account for around 10,000 of those votes. And the district picked up an additional, I think, 78,000 of potential likely voters. So when you're looking at that margin of error, it's, I think, going to be a much tighter race than people would assume if you're just looking at, Twitter. I mean, well, I know that Marjorie Taylor Greene's not on Twitter anymore, but kind of the public persona and the assumption.
Mhm.
I also think that Jennifer's doing a really good job of getting out and talking to people in the district, and is really focused again on the efficiency of who's representing, Georgia 14 in DC, and the fact that, Marjorie Taylor Greene not only is not seated on any committees, she's repeatedly stated that she doesn't want to be on committees. And she hasn't introduced a piece of legislation that's been taken up by committees since last April. So this is not somebody who's trying to represent her people right back in Georgia. And so I think that there's a compelling message there, and a lot of interest from what I've heard from Jennifer's campaign on what it looks like. And I think it's still going to be, it's going to be a campaign. It's going to be a tough campaign. Name recognition is really important.
Mhm.
But I don't think that it's kind of an insurmountable feat.
Do you see, are there any others that are out there that are challenging some of the more hardline populist folk? And who are they? Who should we be people should know about?
Oh, absolutely. Let me pull up my list, because
Okay.
we have, so Republican Women for Progress, generally speaking, we will come out with endorsements or a slate of people that we are following and we like. A little bit later in the season, just because primaries can come up on you so fast. But for some of the worst people in our party, we think that it's important to kind of get in early. So Jennifer Strahan is running against Marjorie Taylor Greene. We also have Wendy Navarez, who's running against Madison Cawthorn, who is another person that we think does not belong in public service. And then kind of the other one is Marina Zimmerman, who's running against Lauren Boebert. So those are kind of the top three.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Rep Gosar.
Why do you think that there hasn't been that much attention on some of these other the candidates who are already in, like the Nancy Maces? Is it a sense of that there has to be a sense of perfectionism? Because I know Mace has not always voted, quote unquote, on the right side, but she's also made other votes. And, I think in the past, we would have said that you would rely on someone who has more, is more in your favor than against you, but that they weren't going to be perfect, that they were going to make some votes that you wouldn't agree with, but they would also make votes that they would. But it seems almost now we have to have someone that is almost perfect. And how do you kind of fight that?
Yeah. So we don't hear a lot about the people who are, I heard it put this way: we want workhorses, not show ponies. And I think we're in this strange time where so much of kind of our governance, right, and the oxygen in the room is taken up by show ponies who, again, want to go have press conferences. I think if you look at most of their staffing, again, I'll highlight Madison Cawthorn as an example here. Although interestingly enough, now VP Kamala Harris did something very similar when she came into the Senate, which is they don't have policy staff, right? They have incredibly well-staffed like press folks and comms people, but they don't have the policy staff because they're there to make a name for themselves for whatever purpose, right? Like whether it's because they have aspirations to higher office or they want a deal with Fox or MSNBC or, you know, some iteration of that, a book deal perhaps. So you get a lot of these people that they are solely focused on capitalizing on getting in front of cameras, right? And then you have the people who are actually there to govern. And not only are they not, you know, they're actively not necessarily thinking about how they get in front of the cameras in the same way, but you have people that are. So you're automatically not going to see as much of them. But then also, I have to admit, with the level of like attention and death threats and how angry people are, and a lot, I mean, look, you get attacks from men and women or to men and women, but the type of gendered attacks that happen on female candidates are really crazy. There are so many death threats and rape threats that are waged at any woman that's kind of in the public space. And these are women who either have stepped away from their families, have decided to like go into public office. I don't think they want to raise their heads high enough that they can have that level of anger or vitriol directed at them.
So let's say we look at November, and let's say it doesn't work out the way that you hope, that the populists, the Trumpists actually make more gains. What then is the strategy?
Yeah. You know what, Dennis? I have not thought that far because I am really hoping that that is not what happens. You know, I think it will be interesting. There are a few key races, obviously, right? Again, I mean, like I'm even thinking about the governor, like the gubernatorial race between Brian Kemp and Perdue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're going to be really interesting races. And to me, even if we have some populists or people who are more populist kind of come through the primaries and win seats in this election cycle, the real question is how many of them are the horses that Donald Trump was betting on? Because I think really in the long term, the Republican Party has to come up with an actual value proposition for the electorate, right? Like we cannot govern just on the fact that we're owning libs or we're putting, you know, more judges on the bench. Like that's not good enough. There are very real challenges facing our country. And we have to have somebody and we have to have a party that's being led by somebody who's interested in offering solutions and an actual idea as to how to fix things. I will go back to the fact that in 2020, the Republican Party did not have a platform that Donald Trump ran on. They rolled over the 2016 platform. So much had changed, you know, not to get too in the weeds, but like, let's be real. If you won a presidential election in 2016 and you're running on the same platform and 4 years later, then theoretically that means that you didn't accomplish anything in those 4 years. Like that would be my argument. But so I think the Republican Party needs to really spend some time figuring out what we stand for and what our solutions are for the American public. I think in order to do that, we have to separate ourselves from Donald Trump. This cannot be a party that is just about fealty to one individual or one ideology in terms of this is the one way that you're a Republican. So to me, I will still take it as positive even if we have some populists kind of come through or people who I think are not good for the party come through. It is going to be, I do not see how the Democrats come out of this cycle without just hemorrhaging seats, quite frankly. So a few populists coming through, okay, I will still take it as a positive and as a win if most of the ones that are being backed by Donald Trump do not make it through. Because again, I think that furthers the separation and the possibility for separation of the Republican Party from Donald Trump. So that's kind of like, I know that's not a real answer, but that's my answer for right now.
So one of the things that you said earlier that I think fascinated me was that you kind of said that this wasn't yet Donald Trump's party.
I don't think it is.
And that's fascinating because there are a lot of people both within the party and without people who are never Trumpers and or not, that say it's already done. This is all belongs to Donald Trump. There's not much that we can do. So I'm just curious, why do you believe what you believe, and why do you think it is not his party yet?
Because I think there's still plenty of us that are fighting, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think in the same way about your question about why we're not hearing, why there aren't more stories about young Kim and Nancy Mace and like all of the wonderful women who are, doing the work right now, Republican women who are doing the work in Congress. It feels the same way. Look, I have worked in DC, coming up on 15 years, and people not only in DC, but across the country that I speak to who are Republicans look around and they say, I do not like that. I don't like that trajectory. And whether or not in 2016 it was because they just couldn't get behind Hillary Clinton. I think you obviously saw this shift in voting for Joe Biden, right? You did see those changes and those gains made in the center right and independent folks. We're out there, right? I think we just don't want to deal with being shouted at all the time, right?
Mhm.
I also say this all the time. I feel lucky that I'm a pugilist at heart, because I am used to stepping into rooms and being like, yeah, this is what I am. And like, if you have a problem with it, like you can come yell at me if you want, like that isn't going to bother me. Right. I am not the norm. Most people don't want to be yelled at. I mean, I would prefer not to be yelled at, but like, I think that people just don't want to be yelled at. They want to belong to their community, and they are afraid that if they say something out of line, their community will disown them or will kick them out. And I think that changes when you're in a voting booth, right?
Mhm.
When you're by yourself, you get to pull the lever for whoever you want. So I think there is far more, there's a far more nuanced space, I think, in the Republican Party than we're often given credit for. And just because there are a lot of people that take up a lot of space in public psyche, and just because you can yell the loudest doesn't mean that there's nobody else kind of in the same room. And I quite frankly, I also see a lot of people trying to invest in the good candidates and the people who are not going to kind of continue leading us down. I think a pathway that just ends up in more tribalism and ugliness and lack of action. So I think we're out there. I just think we're quieter. But I also do think it's why I continue to tell people, like, pick your lane and fight, right? Because again, if you don't live in an open primary state and you are independent, make no mistake, you are throwing away your voting power, right? Because you can vote in the general, but that's not where the real decisions are happening. It's the primaries. So as much as you might not like it, if you think you actually have a good Republican candidate that you can back in your district and you are an independent, but you lean right, make that shift over and support those good candidates.
Mm. So what do you think about Glenn Youngkin? I mean, what effect do you think he's had on the GOP, and what effect do you think that it'll have in November?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, that was a fascinating race to watch. And so I live in
Yes.
DC. Yeah. And it was really interesting, right? I think that Terry McAuliffe ran a terrible campaign, first of all.
Yeah.
But then Youngkin managed to run a really clean, good campaign where he was just close enough to Donald Trump without being, tied to Donald Trump. So I think he managed to kind of telegraph some of the issues that people in Virginia were concerned about as it relates to schools and schooling and school choice. And, I think he ran a really good campaign. I am very interested and curious to see how he governs now that he's officially in office. Clearly he's going to try to deliver on some of his campaign promises as it relates to schools. I don't agree with kind of the barring of critical race theory. Like, I think that feels like I don't understand how that is becoming a flagpole issue, but learning is good. It's always good to learn about anything you can. It's good to learn about. So I don't understand kind of how angry people get about having critical race theory taught. But I think he's going to try to deliver on some of those promises, which I don't think are going to go over particularly well, with some of the strongholds that tend to be, bluer, in Northern Virginia being the big one. It'll sell really well down south and in more Southern Virginia. But I'm curious to see how he actually governs, because I think he ran a cleverer campaign than I thought he would. I assumed that he was going to cleave really close to Donald Trump, and I was very wrong on that. So I think I'm waiting to see what he actually delivers on. But let's be real here. Like, he's, a finance bro kind of yuppie. Like, I can't imagine that he is like going to be super populist now he actually governs Virginia. Like, that wouldn't make any sense to me in terms of him delivering on things. I do think, though, that Virginia and New Jersey, although, you didn't see the Republican gains, but I mean, in terms of flipping seats, but you did see how much closer they got. Are real bellwethers. And I think Democrats, I was hoping, and I think some of them have taken this lesson, that really what they should have taken, the takeaway from those races and those off-cycle elections should have been that they were going too far and kind of acquiescing too much the progressives in their party. I think some of them have taken that message. I think others have said, no, the problem is that we haven't gone far enough, and that's why Republicans made gains. I think if that's the line they're going to run on in 22, then their numbers are just going to be even more astronomical in terms of their losses than I'm thinking they are. But yeah, I think it's Virginia and New Jersey are really interesting as bellwethers.
So actually, kind of final question here is, there are a lot of people who would in the past consider themselves Republicans and probably would love to get back there again, that I think are consider themselves homeless right now. They don't feel comfortable with the GOP. They may have not yet or decided the Democrats are still kind of too far away, but they'll vote for them sometimes. But they just feel like there's no place for them in politics anymore. What do you say to those people, especially to maybe get them involved, to hopefully maybe bring the GOP back to some sense of functioning again?
Yeah. It makes total sense to me why people feel politically homeless. I have felt that way myself. And what has gotten me through is my community with the never Trumpers that I fell in with. And then my organization, Republican Women for Progress, is kind of, we're kind of the island of misfit toys for all of the different Republican women across the country that feel homeless. So it's important. It's important to have a community. I think at the same time that I want politics to go back to being local, I do also think that right now, if you do feel politically homeless, kind of in the Republican Party or having just left it, or in kind of like this centrist space on either side, there are national organizations, again, like mine, that are constantly looking for people and will hopefully, give you also that like bolstering of the fact that you're not alone, right? Like, you're not looking around at this world being like, I'm uncomfortable with the direction of things and I don't like what's happening. You're not alone. There are plenty of us out there. And it's really an issue of how you find that, I don't want to say replacement community, right? Because that feels like you don't need to say goodbye to everything you knew just because we're in the place that we are right now. But sometimes you can build new relationships and new communities. And I think it's really important to give people that space, because you cannot ask somebody to leave their community or to self-isolate out of their community without giving them another community to enter into, right? Like, we are social beings. Human beings are social. We need that interaction and we need that support of a broader community. So I think if you're feeling disenfranchised, if you feel politically homeless, there are all sorts of organizations. Again, there's my organization. I know that Renew America is trying to kind of build out different state chapters. There are also kind of like nonpartisan groups that are focused on either candidate training or support, or different that are like different issue areas that if you are particularly passionate about climate change, for instance, which you can be a Republican and passionate about needing climate action, that you can get involved with. I think finding a community that speaks to your political leanings is probably the most important thing. And then I think just like take a look at who's on your slate for your upcoming elections and just do some research, right? Because I would put money on there being a candidate. If you are, a disenfranchised or politically homeless Republican, I would put money on the fact that you probably have somebody on that's coming up on the slate, state, local, or federal, that either suits your political leanings a little bit better or speaks to your concerns. And that can be everything down to like your local dog catcher, right? But if you find those people and if you do that research and you reach out, I guarantee you will start finding like a broader community, because candidates for anything have support systems, if they're like, because they have to get people to like them, right? They have to get people to like buy into what they're selling. And so also if there's somebody that speaks to you in one of your elections, I would put money on their supporters or their campaign staff, or the people that they surround themselves with are probably pretty similarly aligned, even if you'll have differences here and there. And I think that that's another great way that you can both have an impact in what's going on in the elections and the overall health of the Republican Party, but also give yourself some new people that might speak a little bit more to where you are right now.
Okay. And would you be willing to kind of give the web address for Republican Women and Twitter and all that, so people can hopefully get involved?
Yes. So we are at GOPwomenforprogress.org. And our Twitter handle, let me pull it up, because I feel like when we first launched, we wanted to be Go Progress, which was GOP Progress. But that was somewhat taken. And so I always forget, we're kind of different iterations on our different socials. So I think, okay. So our Twitter handle is RWFP, P being for progress, and then like progress. So RWF Progress is our Twitter handle. And I think that's the same for Instagram, but let me just double check. Yeah, the same as, no, that's not our same. Hold on, my apologies. I should have had this locked and loaded. This is how I know I'm getting a little bit older, is I'm so terrible with like web space.
I know.
Okay, so on Instagram, we're our Women for Progress.
Okay.
So yeah, we come check us out, and we're going to be rolling out a whole bunch of different information on our candidates that we're following and tracking. And also, if you're a Republican woman, you want to run for office, any office, please get in touch. We're happy to support you. And I do think that this is really important. You don't have to mirror my brand of Republicanism, because Republicans in California to Georgia to Oklahoma to Minnesota, we all look a little bit different. And so you do not need to be one type. Like, we do not have a litmus test. If you are a Republican woman who wants to govern, look us up. We're here to support you. All
right. Well, thank you, Ariel, for coming back. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And you know where to find me if you need me again. Always happy to talk about things.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks.